Honestly, General, with all due respect, what is a glorified bus driver going to teach us about air superiority? The words, slick with the unearned confidence of youth and technological advantage, echoed in the cavernous, chilled air of the red flag briefing auditorium. A ripple of condescending chuckles spread through the tiered seats, a wave of validation for the speaker. Captain Jake Hotshot Vance, whose flight suit seemed shrink-wrapped to a frame built by ego. He stood at the podium, a predator in his element, the tip of the spear for a squadron of F-22 Raptor pilots who saw the world through the diamond-sharp clarity of a heads-up display. To them, the sky was a chessboard, and they were the queens. Everything else was a pawn. Major Anya Sharma, the target of his rhetorical barb, said nothing. She didn't flinch. Her posture, ramrod straight in the simple olive-drab flight suit of an Air Mobility Command pilot, didn't change by a single degree. Her gaze remained fixed on the massive tactical display that dominated the front wall, a glowing tapestry of simulated threats and friendly assets scattered across the Nevada desert. Her hands rested on the table before her, one over the other, a study in stillness. To the casual observer, she was the very picture of insignificance, a logistics officer accidentally seated among gods of the air. Her aircraft, the C-17 Globemaster III, was a leviathan of transport, a symbol of strategic reach but not tactical lethality. In Vance's world, it was a target, a slow-moving box that delivered the beans and bullets so real pilots could fight. His insult wasn't just an insult. It was a statement of doctrine, a reaffirmation of the hierarchy that placed him and his stealth fighters at the apex of the military food chain. He saw her silence as acquiescence, her calm as weakness. He saw the absence of fighter wing patches on her shoulders as a lack of belonging. He saw a cargo pilot. But General Marcus Thorne, from his command chair in the dimly lit back row, saw something else entirely. He wasn't looking at her flight suit. He was looking at the quiet economy of her movement as she made a small note on her datapad. He saw the way her eyes tracked the simulated threat emitters on the map, not with the broad awareness of a transport pilot, but with the predatory focus of an analyst, a hunter. And then he saw it, a ghost of a detail that sent a jolt of ice through his veins. Tucked under the collar of her flight suit, almost completely obscured, was the faint, dark blue outline of a tattoo, a small, stylized, bat-like creature with jagged wings. A symbol he hadn't seen in person in over a decade. A symbol that belonged to a unit that didn't officially exist, flying missions that were never recorded, piloted by ghosts who were spoken of only in whispers in secure facilities. He leaned forward, his mouth subtly dry. He squinted at the personnel roster on his own screen, his finger tracing down the list until it landed on her name. Major Anya Sharma. Call sign, Fury. The general's blood ran cold. It wasn't her current call sign. It couldn't be. The system must have pulled a legacy file. That call sign belonged to a legend, to a pilot from a black program, so secret its funding was buried in a dozen different budgets. It belonged to the original Night Fury. He looked from the file back to the unassuming woman at the table, the woman being mocked by a pilot who thought the world was defined by thrust-to-weight ratios. Thorne realized with dawning horror that this wasn't just a briefing. It was a powder keg, and Captain Vance had just lit the fuse. If you believe true competence is measured in silence, not volume, type proven in the comments below. The general's silence from the back of the room was a heavy blanket, but it wasn't enough to smother the smug atmosphere Vance had cultivated. The young captain preened, mistaking the lack of immediate rebuke for approval. He continued his presentation, his laser pointer dancing across the screen, outlining the complex ballet of offensive counter-air that his F-22 squadron would execute. He spoke of denying access, of establishing dominance, of achieving kinetic effects. His language was aggressive, confident, and utterly dismissive of any asset that couldn't break the sound barrier or pull 9GS. He threw a cursory glance at Sharma. Major Sharma's C-17, he said, the words Major and C-17 dripping with sarcasm, will be conducting a logistics run on the exercise's periphery, simulating a supply drop at range 70. Her role is to stay out of the way, avoid the threat rings, and essentially be invisible, he smirked. Something a Globemaster isn't exactly built for. More chuckles. The pilots in the room, men and women who live by the creed of speed and stealth, saw the truth in his words. The C-17 was a magnificent beast of an aircraft, a marvel of engineering capable of lifting an Abrams tank and landing it on a dirt strip, but it was also a flying barn door. Its radar cross-section could be measured in acres. Against the sophisticated, layered air defense network simulated for this exercise, it was a colossal, slow-moving bullseye. Anya Sharma simply picked up her datapad. Her fingers moved across the screen with a fluid, practiced efficiency, calling up technical specifications, performance charts, and electronic warfare suite capabilities for her aircraft. She wasn't just looking at the C-17 stats. She was cross-referencing them with the known parameters of the simulated SA-21 Growler and SA-22 Greyhound missile systems projected on the main screen. Her focus was absolute, a bubble of pure, cold analysis in a room thick with testosterone and arrogance. She drew a line with her stylus, a gentle, curving arc that connected her designated flight path with the edge of the densest simulated threat zone, a line that, to anyone else, would look like a catastrophic navigational error, an amateur's mistake. But to her, it was a calculation. It was a possibility. The quiet competence she exuded was so profound it became a form of camouflage. The other pilots saw a logistics officer preparing for a milk run. They saw a woman out of her depth, wisely keeping her mouth shut while the real warriors planned the fight. They didn't see the gears turning behind her calm, dark eyes. They didn't see the decades of classified training, the thousands of hours spent not just flying, but dissecting the very systems they were about to face. They didn't understand that while they were learning to defeat enemy radar, she had been part of the team that wrote the code for the simulators that taught them. Her silence wasn't born of fear or ignorance. It was the silence of a grandmaster watching amateurs set up the board, already seeing the checkmate 10 moves ahead. It was the patience of a predator that knows its prey is loud, predictable, and utterly blind to the real danger. The injustice of the moment was a palpable thing. It hung in the air, heavier than the recycled atmosphere of the windowless room. Here was a professional, a master of a hidden craft, being publicly belittled by a man whose entire perception of warfare was defined by the sleek, gray shell of his fighter jet. The onlookers, her peers in uniform, were complicit in their silence, reinforcing a culture where the loudest voice, the flashiest machine, was assumed to be the most valuable. And through it all, she remained a statue of professional discipline, her non-reaction a more powerful statement than any retort could ever be. She was letting his assumptions build. She was letting their prejudice solidify. Because she knew that assumptions, when they met the hard reality of combat, shattered like glass. And the fallout from that shattering was always, without fail, a lesson learned. The exercise began under the unforgiving glare of the Nevada sun. The sky, a vast, bleached blue canvas, was soon streaked with the ethereal white contrails of fighter jets climbing to altitude. On the tactical network, dozens of symbols blinked and moved, a digital storm of controlled chaos. Captain Hotshot, Vance was in his element, the cockpit of his F-22 Raptor, call sign Raptor 1, feeling less like a machine and more like an extension of his own body. Viper flight, check in, he commanded, his voice crisp and authoritative over the secure channel. His wingman, Raptor 2, responded instantly. Below them, the desert floor was a wrinkled, brown map of rock and sand. To the far east, a single, heavy blue icon crawled across the screen. Sharma's C-17 reached 7-1, beginning its long, slow journey to the simulated drop zone. Vance spared it a contemptuous glance on his display. The bus was on its route. Good. Now the real work could begin. Command, Raptor 1 is pushing into the exercise area, engaging offensive counter-air. He pushed the throttles forward, and the twin Pratt and Whitney engines responded with a surge of raw power, pressing him back into his seat. The plan was simple, elegant, and aggressive. He and his wingmen would use their stealth to slip past the outer layer of simulated enemy radar, eliminate the primary IEDS, Integrated Air Defense System, command node, and then roll back to annihilate the SAM launchers, clearing a path for the non-stealthy F-16s and F-15s behind them. It was a script they had practiced 100 times in the simulator. It was a hunt they were born for. But today, the prey was different. As they crossed the invisible line into the hostile territory, their cockpit displays remained clean. Too clean. The familiar signatures of the search radars they expected to see were absent. Command, Raptor 1. I'm showing a clean scope. Is the Red Air Network active? A pause. Then the voice of the exercise controller, General Thorne himself, crackled back. Affirmative, Raptor 1. The network is active. And they see you. Before Vance could process the words, his world erupted in a symphony of alarms. A shrill, piercing tone filled his helmet. His threat display, once clear, was suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. Multiple red triangles, the symbol for a hard lock from a fire control radar, blossomed around his icon. Jesus! Multiple locks. Savanti. How? They can't see us! His wingman yelled over the comms, his voice tight with panic. The simulated enemy hadn't just turned on their radar. They had used a new tactic. A network of low-frequency acquisition radars had detected the almost imperceptible disturbance their stealth fighters made in the atmosphere, cueing the high-frequency targeting radars for a split-second snapshot lock. It was a theoretical tactic, something briefed in intelligence reports, but never seen in a live exercise. Their multi-million-dollar advantage, their cloak of invisibility, had been rendered useless. Break right. Deploy countermeasures. Vance screamed, yanking his stick hard over, his body crushed by the G-forces. But the locks held. They were painted, held fast in an invisible beam of energy. On the main screen back at command, their icons were flashing red. In the cold calculus of the simulation, they were already dead. Then, the second blow fell. A wave of electronic noise washed over them. The comms dissolved into a roar of static. Their data links, connecting them to the wider tactical picture, severed. They were blind, deaf, and alone, trapped deep inside a digital kill box. The confident hunter had become the cornered animal. And it was in that moment of pure, terrifying silence, the silence of being utterly cut off, that a new voice broke through the static. It was calm, it was clear, and it was utterly unexpected. Raptor Flight, this is Reach 7-1. It was Sharma. The voice was an impossibility. It cut through the electronic blizzard with unnerving clarity, a single, calm signal in a hurricane of digital noise. For a moment, Vance thought he was hallucinating, the stress of the situation manufacturing ghosts in the static. But the voice came again, measured and precise, devoid of any panic. Raptor 1, I have you on my scope. You have 2 active fire control locks from your 7 o'clock position. Recommend immediate defensive turn to heading 130. I will handle the network. Vance was speechless. Handle the network? From AC-17? It was absurd. It was like a tugboat offering to sink a battleship. But his own systems were useless. His training irrelevant against this new threat. He was out of options. His wingman's panicked breathing was the only other sound in his helmet. Survival instinct took over. Raptor 2, brake left, heading 130. Now, he commanded, throwing his own aircraft into a gut-wrenching turn. Back in the C-17's cockpit, Anya Sharma was not flying a cargo plane anymore. She was conducting an orchestra of electronic warfare. Her aircraft, the glorified bus, was equipped with one of the most advanced defensive suites in the inventory, designed to protect the lumbering giant from sophisticated threats. But Sharma was using it in a way its designers had never imagined. She wasn't just defending. She was attacking. Her fingers danced across her console, her movements a blur of practiced economy. She wasn't just jamming the enemy radar. She was actively manipulating it. She isolated the specific frequencies of the Red Air Network's command and control data link, the very link that allowed their SAM sites to communicate and coordinate. Then, She pushed the full power of her EW suite not as a broad shield of noise, but as a focused, surgical lance of pure data. On the tactical display back at command, the observers gasped. The dense web of red lines connecting the enemy assets began to flicker. The SAM launchers, which had been linked into a cohesive, lethal network, were suddenly showing as isolated, independent units. Sharma had inserted herself into their decision-making loop, feeding them ghost signals and corrupted data, turning their greatest strength, their network, into their greatest weakness. She had, in essence, made them argue with each other. Then came the masterstroke. She pushed the throttles of the 4 massive engines to their absolute limit, banking the colossal aircraft into a steep, stomach-churning turn that defied its very design. The C-17, weighing over 250,000 pounds, groaned in protest, but it held. She wasn't running. She was positioning. She flew her plane directly along the line of sight between the 2 trapped F-22s and the cluster of SAMs that had them locked. The enormous metal body of the Globemaster became a physical shield, a moving wall of radar-reflecting steel. For a critical 3-second window, she created a shadow corridor, a blind spot in the enemy's vision. Raptor flight, window is open. Go now, she stated, her voice as calm as if she were ordering coffee. Vance didn't hesitate. He saw the locks on his display flicker and die, starved of their tracking data. Full burner. Exit south, he yelled. The 2 F-22s rocketed through the gap Sharma had created, escaping the kill box just as the C-17 cleared the line of sight and the enemy network reacquired its bearings. But it was too late. The Raptors were gone. The entire engagement had lasted less than 90 seconds. In the aftermath, a profound silence descended. In the cockpits of the F-22s, there was the silence of shock and adrenaline. In the Red Air Command Center, there was the silence of utter confusion. And in the main auditorium at command, where every pilot and commander had watched the events unfold on the main screen, there was the deafening silence of total, unadulterated awe. Captain Hotshot Vance, now safely outside the threat ring, circled his jet, his breathing ragged. He looked at his display, at the friendly blue icon of the C-17 lumbering back towards its designated route as if nothing had happened. How? The reply came back, as calm and minimalist as ever. I handle the network. Resume your mission. Raptor 1-inch. The debriefing room was a tomb. The air, once crackling with bravado and laughter, was now thick with a heavy, contemplative silence. The same pilots who had chuckled at Captain Vance's joke now sat rigidly in their seats, their eyes fixed on the front of the room, avoiding eye contact with each other and especially with the woman who sat, as before, in quiet composure at the front table. Captain Vance stood beside the podium, not behind it. He looked smaller, his flight suit seeming to hang off his frame. The swagger was gone, replaced by a pale, haunted look. He had replayed the engagement data a dozen times. It made no sense. AC-17 couldn't do what he had witnessed. Its defensive suite was just that, defensive. It was designed to spoof a single incoming missile, not to dismantle an entire integrated air defense network. Using the aircraft's physical bulk as a momentary radar shield was a move of such audacious, high-risk genius it bordered on insanity. It required a level of situational awareness, technical mastery, and sheer nerve that he had never before encountered. He was a man adrift, his foundational beliefs about air combat completely capsized. It was into this vacuum of understanding that General Thorne stepped forward. He walked from the back of the auditorium, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and stood at the center of the stage. He didn't look at Vance. He looked directly at Major Sharma. Major, he began, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Would you care to explain to the room your technique for disrupting the Red Air network? Anya Sharma looked up from her datapad, her expression unreadable. Sir, she said, her voice clear and direct. I exploited a recursive loop in their data link's handshake protocol by feeding the primary command node a corrupted authentication signal. I forced the network to revalidate every asset in the chain, creating temporary packet loss and sensor degradation. The physical masking maneuver was to cover the latency period before the system could reboot and reacquire. The room stared in blank confusion. She might as well have been speaking another language. The technical density of her explanation was a wall they couldn't penetrate. Vance just shook his head slowly, the words meaning nothing to him. It was a magic trick explained with magical terms. General Thorne nodded slowly, a deep, profound understanding in his eyes. He knew that what she had just described was not in any C-17 flight manual. It was not standard procedure. It was the work of an artist, a virtuoso who didn't just operate the machine, but understood its soul, its every digital sinew. He turned to the main console operator. "Sergeant, bring up Major Sharma's personnel file. Full record. Security override Thorne. Alpha 7-5". The sergeant's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, Anya Sharma's official service record filled the massive screen. It began as expected. Sharma, Anya. Major, U.S. Air Force. Current assignment, Air Mobility Command. Aircraft, C-17 Globemaster 3. Vance nodded mutely. It was what he expected. Then, the general spoke again. "Go to her previous assignments." "Sergeant," the screen scrolled, and the room collectively held its breath. The screen refreshed, and a new section of the file appeared, headed "Previous Assignments, Classified." The lines of text that appeared beneath it were stark, minimalist, and sent a seismic shockwave through the auditorium. The language was coded, full of acronyms and program names that meant nothing to most of the pilots, but the implications were earth-shattering. Unit. Redacted Special Access Program. Aircraft. Redacted Tier 1 Asset. Mission Classification. Top Secret / Codeword. Combat Hours. 2,500. Designation. Unconventional Electronic Warfare / Penetration. Medals. Distinguished Flying Cross with V for Valor. X2. Silver Star. The list went on, a litany of heroic, impossible achievements hidden behind the black ink of government secrecy. The pilots began to murmur, the sound a low buzz of disbelief and dawning comprehension. They were not looking at the file of a cargo pilot. They were looking at the resume of a ghost, a warrior who had fought battles they had never heard of, in skies they didn't know existed, flying an aircraft that was likely still a state secret. General Thorne let the information sink in, allowing the weight of it to press down on the room, crushing the last remnants of their arrogant assumptions. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. "Sergeant," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority, "display her legacy call sign." A single line of text appeared at the bottom of the screen. It was simple, stark, and to the few in the room who understood its significance, it was the stuff of legend. Legacy call sign. Night Fury. A gasp went through the room. Night Fury wasn't just a call sign. It was a myth. A story whispered in the bars at Nellis and Langley. A story about a pilot in the early days of the global war on terror. A pilot who flew a new, experimental stealth platform. Something that wasn't a fighter or a bomber, but a phantom designed to slip through the most advanced air defenses on Earth and dismantle them from the inside out. Night Fury was the pilot credited with single-handedly blinding an entire enemy air force during the opening hours of a now-famous conflict, paving the way for the conventional forces that followed. The legend said Night Fury could make a radar network believe it was a flock of birds, or a commercial airliner, or simply make it go blind. But no one knew who the pilot was. The program was too secret. The records were sealed. It had become a modern military folktale. Until now. General Thorne turned his body fully towards Anya Sharma. His posture shifted, the relaxed stance of a commander replaced by the rigid, formal bearing of a soldier addressing a superior. Not in rank, but in stature. He drew himself to attention. "Major Sharma," he began, his voice formal. Then he stopped, correcting himself with a tone of deep, profound reverence. "My apologies. Night Fury." He raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a senior officer. It was a salute of genuine, heartfelt respect. A salute from one warrior to another. to a legend. The entire room was frozen in stunned silence. The dots connected with the force of a lightning strike, the impossible maneuver, the encyclopedic knowledge of enemy systems, the unnerving calm under pressure. It all made sense. She hadn't just studied the enemy's playbook, she had written it. She had been the original ghost in the machine, the architect of the very electronic warfare tactics the Red Air Team was now trying to emulate. The man who had programmed the simulation's new, unbeatable network logic had learned his craft from her. Captain Vance stared, his mouth agape. The woman he had called a bus driver was the reason pilots like him could fly into contested airspace with any hope of survival. His entire career, the doctrine he lived by, the stealth technology he worshipped, it was all built on the foundation of the silent, invisible war she had fought years before he ever pinned on his wings. The humiliation he felt was total, but it was quickly being replaced by something else, a deep, humbling, and overwhelming sense of awe. The story of what happened in Red Flag Exercise 22 to force spread through the Air Force with the speed of a viral meme. It wasn't an official report. It was something far more powerful. It was a legend, passed from pilot to pilot in hushed tones in squadron bars, shared in encrypted chat rooms among maintenance crews, and whispered by intelligence analysts who saw the raw data and couldn't believe their eyes. The tale was simple and mythic. A C-17, the Gray Lady of the airlift fleet, had gone head-to-head with a state-of-the-art simulated air defense network and won. It had saved two of the most advanced fighter jets on the planet, not with missiles or guns, but with sheer intellect and audacity. And it had been flown by a quiet major who, it turned out, was the living embodiment of a ghost story. They started calling the maneuver Fury's Gambit, the act of using a non-traditional asset in a radically unexpected way to create a tactical advantage. It became a byword for a new way of thinking, a challenge to the rigid doctrines that had governed air combat for decades. Suddenly, airlift and logistics crews were seen in a new light. Their aircraft weren't just trucks, they were nodes in a network, potential weapons in a digital war, their value limited only by the imagination of the person in the cockpit. The cultural shift was subtle but profound. The clear, sharp line between fighter and support began to blur. A new respect was born, a respect earned not in a briefing room, but forged in the crucible of a simulated battle that felt terrifyingly real. Captain Jake Vance was a changed man. The hotshot persona was gone, stripped away by the harsh light of his own ignorance. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. The day after the debrief, he sought out Major Sharma. He didn't find her in the officers' club or the command center. He found her on the flight line, standing under the colossal wing of her C-17, speaking quietly with her young loadmaster, patiently explaining a fine point of weight and balance calculation. Vance approached, not with a swagger, but with a hesitant, deferential posture. He stood for a moment, waiting to be acknowledged. Sharma finished her conversation, then turned to him, her expression neutral. "Captain," she said simply. "Ma'am," Vance began, his voice low, the word ma'am now carrying a weight it never had before. I wanted to apologize for what I said in the briefing. I was arrogant. I was wrong. There's no excuse." Anya Sharma looked at him, her gaze steady. She saw no satisfaction in his humbling, no pleasure in his apology. She simply saw a pilot who had learned a lesson. "We all have our mission, Captain," she replied, her tone even. "Assumptions are a liability in any combat environment. Now you have new information." It was the most profound absolution he could have imagined because it wasn't personal. It was a technical debrief of his own character flaw. "The information I have," Vance said, "is that my squadron and I know nothing about what you do, about how you see the battle space. I was wondering, ma'am, I was hoping you would be willing to teach us." A small, almost imperceptible change occurred in Sharma's expression. It wasn't a smile, but a softening of her features, a flicker of approval in her eyes. This was the true victory, not the apology, but the genuine desire to learn. The transformation of a rival into a student. "I'm not a teacher, Captain," she said, "but I can show you how a C-17 thinks." And so began an informal tradition at the base. Twice a week, Major Sharma would meet with Vance's F-22 squadron. They didn't meet in a formal briefing room, but in a ready room, a place of worn chairs and the smell of stale coffee, the inner sanctum of the fighter pilot. At first, it was awkward. The pilots, accustomed to lectures on thrust vectors and missile evasion, didn't know what to make of her lessons. She didn't use slides filled with jargon and diagrams. Instead, she talked about logistics as a weapon. She spoke of fuel and supply lines not as a chore for the support crews, but as the lifeblood of any operation, a vulnerability to be defended in their own plans and a target to be attacked in the enemy's. She taught them to see the battlefield not just as a three-dimensional space of altitude and airspeed, but as a fourth-dimensional space of time and resources. She used her C-17 as a classroom, showing them how its powerful sensors and communication suite could be used to gather and relay intelligence, creating a picture of the battle space that was often clearer and broader than what their own specialized fighters could see. She taught them that the network was the true weapon system, and every single aircraft, from the stealthiest fighter to the largest transport, was a critical part of it. The pilots began to change. They started asking different questions during mission planning. Where are the tankers? Became, how can we protect the tankers? What's the cargo plane's route? Became, how can we integrate the cargo plane's sensors into our tactical picture? Captain Vance became her most dedicated student. He absorbed her philosophy of quiet competence, of letting the results speak for themselves. His flying became more precise, less reckless. He became a leader who listened more than he spoke. The change was so noticeable that General Thorne called him into his office one day. "You're a different pilot, Captain," Thorne observed, looking at Vance's latest performance review. "A better one. I have a good teacher, sir," Vance replied simply. The legend of Fury's Gambit was eventually formalized. A new training module was designed and integrated into the Red Flag curriculum. It forced fighter pilots to solve complex tactical problems where the only solution involved using support and logistics aircraft in unconventional, creative ways. The module was officially designated Advanced Integrated Asset Employment, but everyone, from the newest airman to the base commander, called it by its real name. They called it the Fury Test. A small, unofficial plaque was mounted on the wall of the main briefing auditorium, right next to the podium. It was simple, made of polished brass on a mahogany base. It didn't have a name on it. It just had an etching of a C-17 Globemaster III shielding two F-22 Raptors, and beneath it, a single quote, "Assumptions are a liability." It was a permanent, silent reminder. A testament to the day a bus driver taught the kings of the sky that the most powerful weapon in the arsenal isn't the aircraft you fly, but the mind of the warrior inside it. Anya Sharma remained unchanged by the notoriety. She deflected praise, redirected questions to her crew, and continued to fly her missions with the same quiet, methodical professionalism. Her worth had never been defined by the opinions of others, so their newfound respect, while welcome, was not necessary. Her reward was seeing the change, watching a new generation of pilots learn to see the whole sky, not just their small, fast-moving piece of it. She was a quiet professional, and her legacy was not in the medals locked away in a classified file, but in the competence and wisdom she instilled in those who would come after her. Weeks turned into months. The blistering heat of a Nevada summer gave way to the sharp, cold winds of winter. The culture at the base had palpably shifted. The old, rigid caste system that separated fighter jocks from trash haulers had eroded, replaced by a new, more integrated sense of purpose. Crews from different commands now mixed freely in the dining halls, sharing knowledge and experiences. A young F-16 pilot might be seen deep in conversation with a C-17 loadmaster, sketching out ideas on a napkin. An intelligence officer might spend an afternoon in a KC-135 tanker simulator, learning the intricacies of aerial refueling not just as a procedure, but as a complex tactical vulnerability. This was Anya Sharma's true, lasting impact. It wasn't a single act of aerial brilliance. It was the slow, steady dismantling of prejudice through demonstrated competence. She had not only proven her own worth, but had, in the process, elevated the perceived worth of every pilot, every maintainer, every airman in a support role. She had reminded them all that the tip of the spear is useless without the strength of the shaft that supports it. General Thorne saw the change and knew it was one of the most significant achievements of his long career. He had overseen the introduction of new aircraft and advanced weapon systems, but this was different. This was a change in the heart and mind of his command. He made Fury's Gambit a permanent, non-negotiable part of the Red Flag syllabus. Every single pilot who passed through the world's most advanced aerial combat school would now be tested on their ability to think beyond their own cockpit, to respect and leverage the capabilities of every asset in the sky. The first class to graduate under this new curriculum presented Major Sharma with a gift. It was a framed photograph, a satellite image of the exercise area where she had performed her maneuver. Overlaid on the image were 3 flight paths, 2 sleek, silver lines for the F-22s and 1 broad, curving golden line for her C-17. The golden line formed a perfect protective arc around the other 2. At the bottom of the frame was a small brass plate with a new name for that section of the desert range. It read, Fury's Corridor. She accepted the gift with a quiet nod. Her only words a simple, heartfelt, thank you. Fly safe. She hung it not in her office, but in the ready room of her own squadron, a reminder to her young C-17 crews of what they were capable of. It was a symbol that their mission was not just about moving cargo, but about being an indispensable part of the fight. They were not bus drivers. They were guardians. They were enablers. They were warriors just as crucial as any other. The story became institutional folklore, a teaching tool for generations of newcomers. Young lieutenants, fresh from flight school and full of the same arrogance Jake Vance once had, would arrive at their first red flag and hear the tale. They would see the plaque in the auditorium and the photograph on the wall. They would learn, before they ever took to the sky, that respect is earned through action, not assumption, and that the quietest person in the room is often the one you should listen to the most. Years later, General Marcus Thorne, now retired, was giving a guest lecture at the Air Force Academy. He stood before a sea of bright-eyed, blue-uniformed cadets, the future leaders of the service. He spoke of strategy, of technology, of the changing face of modern warfare. At the end of his speech, a young cadet in the front row raised her hand. Sir, she asked, in your long career, what was the single most advanced and effective weapon system you ever witnessed in action? A slow smile spread across the old general's face. He looked out at the young faces, the future of the force, and he thought of stealth fighters, of hypersonic missiles, of satellite networks, and all the technological marvels he had commanded. But his mind settled on a memory of a dimly lit debriefing room, of a calm, quiet major, and of a moment of transcendent skill that had changed the way he saw the world. The most effective weapon system I ever saw, General Thorne said, his voice filled with a reverence the cadets had never heard before, was a C-17 Globemaster. But that's not the important part. The weapon system wasn't the aircraft. It was the mind of the pilot flying it. It was a weapon forged from humility, discipline, and a profound understanding that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It was quiet. It was professional. And it was absolutely unstoppable. He let that sink in. Never forget that, he continued, his gaze sweeping the room. The technology will always change. The planes you fly today will be in a museum tomorrow. But that weapon, the one inside you, your character, your intellect, your professional calm, that is timeless. That is what makes a warrior. Everything else is just a tool. The story of Anya, Night Fury, Sharma had become more than just a legend. It had become a foundational principle, a legacy that wasn't written in a history book or carved into a monument, but was woven into the very fabric of the institution. It lived on in the changed attitudes of thousands of pilots, in the revised doctrines of air combat, in the quiet confidence of a new generation of leaders who understood that competence speaks for itself. Her work was done, not because she had retired or moved on, but because her philosophy had taken root. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a file. It's what continues to move forward in the actions and beliefs of others. It is the quiet, enduring echo of a job well done. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a professional silence defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.